morning, church. In the Bible, we have a number of different kinds of stories, but I'm going to categorize them into two parts. You have the G-rated precious moment stories. I don't know if you remember the porcelain figurines, but they would be little touching moments from the Bible, maybe Mary holding Jesus as a baby, or Jesus welcoming the children to him, or something like this. But we've got these stories that make us feel good. Then we have these other stories where if we look at them and we read them, where we might blush. We might say, how in the world is this in Scripture? Well, in Genesis chapter 33, we don't have one of those heartwarming stories. We have one of those tragic stories, one of those stories where you might need to be careful who you're around when you read it, because it deals with some themes that are quite difficult for certain people to comprehend how in the world that is in the Bible. In this story, you end up with Jacob and his family moving to Shechem for a period of time, and one of his daughters decides that she's going to go out and enjoy herself and get to know some of the women of this land. What ends up happening is that there is a man, actually a prince, that takes a liking to her and treats her in a way that is evil, to say the least. He violates her. Jacob finds out about this, doesn't initially do anything, but rather meets with the guy's father, and they come up with a plan. Well, we'll just make the two marry, and we can move on about this without any more trouble. Well, Dinah's brothers, in particular Simeon and Levi, they are not satisfied with this. In fact, they are so angry that they want to exact revenge, not only on Shechem himself, who committed this vile act, but all of the men in that group. And so they come up with this idea. They say, hey, that's fine. You can marry our sister, but you have to be circumcised first. And so Shechem and his father Hamor, and then the people, the men in the town, they all agree, hey, we're going to do this. And part of the reason that they agree to this is because the men in this town are told, hey, look, if this happens, eventually we'll be able to take all the possessions of the Israelites. Well, they end up being circumcised, and in the third day after this, they're in a position where they're not able to do a whole lot. Simeon and Levi pick up their swords, they go into the town, and they slaughter every single man in that town, including the guilty and the unguilty. The brothers of Simeon and Levi then come in and they take everything out. They take the women and the children captive, and they take all the livestock and all the possessions of the town and bring it home themselves. Jacob finds out about this. He's quite angry. Unfortunately, he wasn't as angry as he should have been about the initial problem, but he's angry about this one, that they've caused this problem. But even in his anger, he seems to have it misplaced. He's angry because he's concerned of the problems that will be brought on him because of his son's act. So here you have this story. It is not a G-rated story. It is a difficult story to read. It is a difficult story to think about, but we have it in Scripture. And so we have to ask, what in the world is going on when God does something like this? In fact, this chapter, the 33rd chapter of Genesis, not once mentions God. God's name is not mentioned. No prayer is uttered. No thought of God is uttered. This is simply men doing what is right in their own eyes. They're taking matters into their own hands in order to fix a situation. And what does it end up like? It ends up as a total and complete mess. Now, what are we supposed to learn with this? Well, there's a lot of things that we can learn. We could learn that we need to control our anger. We should really seek justice in all instances. For example, Jacob should have been concerned with what happened with his daughter, but for various reasons, he apparently didn't care as he should. There's lots of different things that we could learn, but there's something that I want to point out in particular, and that is that even through great evil in Scripture, the providence of God is on full display. That is, the events here are not outside of what is happening. When man decides they're going to go it on their own and leave God out of the equation, it ends up in absolute chaos. But God says, even through that great evil, I am in control and I will bring about good. Now, the story of Reuben doesn't take place here, but we know that Reuben, who's the firstborn child of Jacob, ends up being cursed because he commits a great sin. Now, in this story, we find out that the result for Simeon and Levi is that their blessing is going to be taken away, and they're not going to be given land. Well, the first, second, and third sons have been kind of moved out of the way because of their own sin. So who does that leave left? It leaves Judah, the fourthborn. And if you'll remember back to David, King David, he was of the tribe of Judah. And then later on down the road, we have a son of David, and that is Jesus Christ, who ends up coming from Judah. So even though we have this great sin on display, and it is great sin. It is people doing what is right in their own eyes, and it just leads to absolute chaos. What we see is that God uses this to bring about something. He brings about the prominence of Judah and his tribe so that David will come from him, and ultimately Jesus will come from him. So while there are difficult stories in Scripture, I don't want us to skip them over. I want us to listen to them, read them, listen to them, take them seriously, and think about them, because they are trying to tell us something. God is using his Scriptures, all of his Scriptures, to teach us, and I want us to think about that, even when it comes to a difficult chapter like Genesis 23. I'll be praying for you. Please pray for me, and Lord willing, I'll see you next week.